Okay, I'm going to look today at a terrific poem by Mark Strand called Velocity Meadows. It's in his 1990 book, The Continuous Life. Strand was, I think, considered an American poet. He was born in Canada, in Prince Edward Island in the 30s. He died about 10 years ago. Number of terrific volumes of poetry in his name. I think the high watermark for him is Dark Harbor from the late 90s. It's one poem in 50 sections, kind of about the coming to self awareness of a poet. And it's really remarkable and doesn't spend a great deal of time on my shelf. It's in my hands quite a bit. So I would urgently recommend that. But this volume here is also very worthwhile and worth spending significant time with. And we're going to look at one of the first poems in it. It's called Velocity Meadows. And before I'm going to, as I did last time with Skunk Hour by Robert Lowell, I'm going to read the poem and then talk about it. But I'm going to invite you to listen to me read the poem or read the poem yourself in your own copy of Continuous Life or in the, I've provided the text in the adjacent spaces here somewhere above or below or alongside. Read it yourself. And one way into poetry that I have found rewarding and useful is to try to spend some time before I try to figure out what it means, not figuring out what it means. Try to spend some time just taking the poem at face value as though it's a straightforward account of some thought process or some incident that the poet is relating, no matter how strange it may seem, no matter how strange the language may seem. And to the extent possible, turn off the thing inside of you, that the software inside of you that wants to analyze it and say that this represents this and this stands for that and so on. And take it at, as I say, at face value and live with it for a while and try to open yourself to it. And remember that, I sound like I'm legislating here, but I'm just kind of describe what's been valuable for me. Remember that art is not really a bottom line proposition. It's not, you're not engaged in some kind of extraction operation where you're mining the thing for its ore, or plundering the substance for some nugget of significance, some theme or thesis or point or something like that. Putting too much emphasis on that is, in my view, myopic and reductive and a bit dreary. It's not really what's distinctive about the poem you've got in your hand. What is as I said, as I think I said last week, the cluster of formal elements that your senses and your mind and your intellect and your imagination encounter. To take the trope of the body and the soul, I think people kind of look at it that way. The language is the body, and you're trying to get there to experience this immaterial essence, as a in some belief systems that's how what a person is. But I would say with art, certainly with poetry, it's the body is the soul. That's what's distinctive about it. It's what makes it what it is. The message could take, if there is one, even, and the message could take many different forms. And as I say, if there is one, I can think of poems that have none. I can suss out, and yet I love them. I'll read them, till I die. And they're things of beauty and sublimity. And as T.S. Eliot said, good poetry can communicate before it's understood. And I think good poetry can communicate even when it isn't ever understood in the way that we usually mean that term. So Susan Sontag has a great essay called Against Interpretation in her book of the same name. And she's talking along these lines as well, and to not interpret a poem so much as give an account of it that describes what it's doing and your experience of it. That's a more that's an approach to it and a way to appreciate it that's more true to what it is. So, okay, I'm going to read the poem now, and then by all means, stop the video, live with it a while, and then I hope you'll come back and consider what I have to say about it. Okay. Velocity Meadows. I can say now that nothing was possible but leaving the house and standing in front of it, staring as long as I could into the valley. I knew that a train, trailing a scarf of smoke, would arrive, that soon it would rain. A frieze of clouds lowered a shadow over the town, and a driving wind flattened the meadows that swept beyond the olive trees and banks of hollyhock and rose. The air smelled sweet, and a girl was waving a stick at some crows so far away they seemed like flies. Her mother, wearing a cape and shawl, shielded her eyes. I wondered from what, since there was no sun. Then someone appeared and said, "Look at those clouds forming a wall, those crows falling out of the sky, those fields, pale green, green yellow, rolling away, and that girl and her mother waving goodbye." In a moment, the sky was stained with a reddish haze, and the person beside me was running away. It was dusk. The lights of the town were coming on, and I saw, dimly at first, close to the graveyard bound by rows of cypress bending down, the girl and her mother, next to each other, smoking, grinding their heels into the ground. Okay, so that's Velocity Meadows. By all means, live with it and then come back anyway, as I said before. Okay, so the first thing to note about it is that this poem, in the same way that last time when we looked at Skunk Hour by Lowell, this is a narrative poem. This is not a poem in which some disembodied mind is meditating on some feeling or some pain, some issue, something he's observing, some object he's observing. There's a scene, a recognizable world. There's a protagonist who is in that scene, and there's a progression from point A to point B. There's this sequence of incident that this protagonist is caught up in. Strange incidents, puzzling incidents. Things don't happen in this poem as they happen in life. People don't speak to each other in this poem as they do in life. There's usually a vein of surrealism in Strand, this mixture of the familiar and the strange. And I don't know if he would approve of that word or if he thought of himself as in any way surrealist, but in any event, it seems to me it's a fair term. But there is a sequence of events that, and that we have a sense of the protagonist being in one place in his mind and feelings at the beginning and in a different place at the end. So starting at the beginning, these first few lines, I can say now that nothing was possible but leaving the house and standing in front of it, staring as long as I could into the valley. I knew that a train trailing a scarf of smoke would arrive, that soon it would rain. I mean, I think overall what you've kind of got here in this poem is this voyage out of an individual from the sort of self-constructed equilibrium of his own sort of ego universe, or the confines represented by the house and by his solitary being, and into an encounter with the external world, the other, however you may want to say it, with all of the indecipherability and disequilibrium that brings him. You go from this feeling of being part of a harmonious whole into a state where things are discordant, things are you have a feeling of disequilibrium, of instability, etc. Things are illegible, to you, and so forth. So he's so secure is he at the beginning. He comes out of his house and stands in front of it. He knows that a train trailing a scarf of smoke would arrive and that soon it would rain. So he's able to, among the familiar objects and landscape features and what have you around him, he knows that not only is he among familiar things, but he's able to predict the future in certain ways. He knows certain things are going to happen. But the curious thing about this, what undermines that sense right from the beginning, is this interesting way that the first line is worded. He says, I can say now that nothing was possible but leaving the house and standing in front of, etc. I can say now, implicitly, as I couldn't say then. I couldn't say at the moment that nothing could have happened except what did happen. So that at the moment of all this happening, as he was facing it in prospect, there would have been a wide field of possible paths or outcomes. But now he knows in hindsight that all that was possible what did happen. So his projection into the future, of events into the future, his expectations, are shown to be unreliable here. And so when he says he knew this was going to happen, he is only able to do that within this little cocoon of his ego and his house, and its immediate surroundings. In any sort of larger sense, he's not able to do that. And that I think that those two ideas of him being able to anticipate the future and him being an unreliable forecaster are clashing there. So then he notes that this frieze of clouds lowered on a shadow over the town, and there's a driving wind that flattens the meadows that swept beyond the olive trees. Okay, so the clouds are lowering a shadow on the town. That may be slightly ominous, but he calls it a frieze of clouds, and I'll get back to that in a second when I get a little further on. And then this driving wind is flattening the meadows. There is this notion of, you get this idea of motion in this poem. The title conveys it, Velocity Meadows. There's motion from the very beginning. He's coming out of his house. He knows a train's going to be trailing a scarf of smoke, so you've got this image of a train moving. You know that rain is coming. And then the clouds are lowering and so forth, and the winds are flattening the meadows. So this may be the sort of first incursion on his sense of stability, this idea that the driving wind is flattening the meadows around him, that motion and change are compromise or threaten things that are rooted and stable, and that so he's beginning to erode and degrade his own sense of stability. These are, I think, at this point, these are just sort of foreshadowings. Then he notes the air smells sweet. It's still a pleasant surroundings. And then there's a girl he sees waving a stick at some crows so far away they seem like flies. So flies are pests. That's not necessarily pleasant. The crows don't seem like crows. They seem like flies. She's waving a stick at them, which can be kind of a threatening or menacing kind of posture. And then her mother, wearing a cape and shawl, shielded her eyes. I wondered from what, since there was no sun. So she's wearing this cape and shawl. She's in this self-protective or kind of defensive posture. She's shielding her eyes. Again, more self-protection. He doesn't know from what, since there's no sun. So he doesn't understand what she's doing. She's sort of unreadable to him. His ability to at least be as he walks out of his house and sees his immediate familiar surroundings, his ability to make sense of things and see things as a harmonious interrelation and stable interrelation is undergoing some degradation here. And then someone appears, some mysterious unnamed someone, who says, look at those clouds forming a wall, those crows falling out of the sky, those fields, pale green, green yellow, rolling away, and that girl and her mother waving goodbye. So this other person, whoever it is, turns up and says things about certain features of the landscape around our protagonist that he himself has already talked about, but in terms that are discrepant and discordant and kind of incommensurate with his own. For example, our protagonist earlier on described the lowering clouds as a frieze of clouds. And that's, of course, an aesthetic term. That's a frieze is pictorial display, a horizontal thing. And the suggestion here is something created, something that is that stimulates the senses in a pleasing way. And he and that still suggests that he sees his world as a harmonious whole. But this other person describes the clouds as forming a wall, which has a very different kind of valence. A wall is typically seen as a barrier to access to your vision, something that prevents, may frustrate, things like that. Not a much more negative set of associations. The crows are falling out of the sky. The girl, the protagonist saw the girl waving a stick at them. They seem like flies. They're so far away, but this man sees them falling out of the sky, and the girl and her mother are waving goodbye. This doesn't overlap at all, very, very, very much, with what our protagonist has perceived. He sees that they both see the crows, they both see the girl and the mother, they both see the clouds, but they mean very different things to them. So here's another encounter with an opaque other, and another inability to connect or relate to that person. The longer this man is outside of his own little cocoon ego world. So this weird guy says this, and then at that moment, as though it's cause and effect, the sky is stained with a reddish haze, and this mysterious someone, runs away. So now, again, we can go back to that, his characterization of the clouds that are lowering over the town as a frieze, and what that seems to suggest about how he views the world he's in. Now he sees the reddish color in the sky as a stain. He's in a very different state of mind, it seems, and he sees that the lights are coming on, sees dimly at first, close to the graveyard, bound by rows of cypress bending down, the girl and her mother next to each other, smoking, grinding their heels to the ground. So when you encounter this girl and her mother, I think one thing you have to consider is whether he's correct in assuming that the adult woman is the mother of the girl. She could easily not be. He doesn't know them. He doesn't have any contact with them. He seems very, very confident in saying that they're a mother and daughter, but I don't know that he can know that. And I think that maybe that there's a suggestion there that he's projecting, as he definitely is in the early going. And they're a strange pair. They're an unsettling pair. They're at the end, they're smoking and grinding their heels into the ground. Both the adult woman and the girl are apparently smoking, sparking up a Chesterfield, and they're grinding their heels into the ground in this sort of angry gesture, so that harmony has ended in disharmony, and things kind of falling apart, and disorder, a kind of entropy, overtakes the whole scene, just by going out of the house. And I think that you can just double back on that first line now. I can say now that nothing was possible. Nothing is possible, of course, but coming out of your cocoon and encountering the other. We can't live just in our own little world. And it suggests that, what's described here in, of course, kind of surreal terms, but the failures to connect, and the indecipherability of other people, and of the ultimate, mysteries of this whole world and universe are kind of make a mockery of our feelings of control, and our feelings of our pretensions to agency, and the exercise of free will, and so on and so forth. So then, coming to the language of the poem, Strand's language is not, there's nothing really unusual, as you must have noted. It's pretty down to earth language, pretty straightforward in most respects. He's a great admirer of Wallace Stevens, and he's and that admiration, I think, is evident if you get acquainted with his work to any extent. You'll see that, but you don't have, in Stevens you'll get a word popping up like a made up word like spissantly, or suddenly convolvulus is there. You don't get things like that in Strand, at least not that I've found. The language is and the continuity are, though relating surreal events or circumstances, very strange events and circumstances, uses very sort of normal language, and there's a very smooth flow, very rounded contours here. There's nothing jagged or abrupt, and yet it's the soil for this strangeness, this kind of uncanniness about what it is to experience life as a human being. And I think that the compound of those two things, this smooth, rounded, kind of unruffled continuity that you get as you read him, and these other more more strange effects, more uncanny effects, is really what's fascinating about Strand. So. I picked this poem because I think it's kind of representative of that in a way that's fairly accessible. But there's I guess I say a number of poems in this book and that are worth reading. I would urgently recommend it. So anyway, now that we've been through all that, I'm going to read the poem again and then I'll sign off. Okay. Velocity Meadows. I can say now that nothing was possible but leaving the house and standing in front of it, staring as long as I could into the valley. I knew that a train trailing a scarf of smoke would arrive, that soon it would rain. A frieze of clouds lowered a shadow over the town, and a driving wind flattened the meadows that swept beyond the olive trees and banks of hollyhock and rose. The air smelled sweet, and a girl was waving a stick at some crows so far away they seemed like flies. Her mother, wearing a cape and shawl, shielded her eyes. I wondered from what, since there was no sun. Then someone appeared and said, "Look at those clouds forming a wall, those crows falling out of the sky, those fields, pale green, green-yellow, rolling away, and that girl and her mother waving goodbye." In a moment the sky was stained with a reddish haze, and the person beside me was running away. It was dusk. The lights of the town were coming on, and I saw, dimly at first, close to the graveyard, bound by rows of cypress bending down, the girl and her mother next to each other, smoking, grinding their heels into the ground.